a sentry on a dolomite rock. In the heart of Carinthia, the southernmost province of Austria, where mountain landscapes gradually merge into the vastness of the valley, stands a true symbol of medieval steadfastness, Hochosterwitz Castle. Its towers, like eternal sentinels, have been vigilantly watching the surrounding lands for centuries, proudly rising above the horizon at a height of 160 meters. Thanks to its majestic architecture, on clear sunny days, the silhouette of the castle can be seen even from a distance of 30 kilometers, which made and makes it an undeniable landmark for every traveler. The fortress is majestically spread out on the top of a steep dolomite cliff, located east of the city of Sankt Veit and der Glan. This is not just a fortification, it is a complex engineering organism that grew out of the mountain itself, becoming a continuation of the natural landscape. From Slavic princes to royal power, the history of Hochosterwitz goes back centuries, much further than one might imagine looking at its stone walls. The first documentary evidence of this object is found in the deed of gift of King Louis II, known as Louis the German. Dated in 860, this official document testified to the transfer of ownership of certain lands to the Diocese of Salzburg. Among the list of these possessions was the Hochosterwitz estate. However, the origins of this stronghold are even older. The name itself, known at that time as Osterwitz, dates back to the era when the Slavic Principality of Carinthian flourished in these territories. This place has long had strategic importance, being a natural center of power in the region. In the pivotal 11th century for history, the castle became an important player in the great game of that time. The Carinthian Duke Engelbert Spangheim, known for his unwavering support of Archbishop Gebhard during the fierce struggle for the investiture, a conflict between secular and ecclesiastical power, gained immense favor from the churchmen. For his faithful service, the Duke was appointed vicar, and as a reward he received several church estates at his disposal, among which the most precious pearl was Hochosterwitz Castle. Thus began the era of its heyday as one of the most impregnable bastions of Carinthia. An impregnable rock, the era of the von Osterwitz. In 1209, the history of the castle took a new turn. Duke Bernhard Spangheim gave this strategic estate to his trusted cupbearer. This event gave rise to a new noble family which went down in history under the surname von Osterwitz, forever merging with the name of its fortress. Under their leadership, the castle turned into a real engineering phenomenon of its time. The owners understood that height is only half the success, so they took radical steps. The rocky slopes around the castle were additionally hewn by craftsmen to turn them into steep vertical cliffs. Any attempt to climb up was suicidal for the enemy army. This impregnability became legendary in 1360. Then the Tyrolean Countess Margaretha Maltas, a woman of iron will, entered into open conflict with the Habsburgs for the Carinthian inheritance. Her ambitions were enormous, but the teeth of her army broke against the walls of Hochosterwitz. The siege, which should have been a triumph, turned into a shameful defeat. The unconquered castle became the main stumbling block, because of which Margaretha was finally forced to abandon her claims to the lands of the duchy. The shadows of Turkish raids and the rebirth under the sign of the Habsburgs. However, time is inexorable, and in May 1478 a tragic page closed the history of the von Osterwitz family. The last representative of this dynasty died in enemy captivity after another devastating invasion of the Turks. Deprived of its owners, the castle found itself under the rule of Emperor Frederick III of Habsburg. The most difficult times came for the fortress. Carinthia became a real shield of Europe, which time after time took on the blows of Turkish raids. Hochosterwitz held out, proving again and again its ability to resist the impassable, but the price was high. The walls were torn apart by battles, and its former greatness faded under the ruins. Salvation came at the beginning of the 16th century. Emperor Maximilian I, realizing the strategic importance of this point, placed the castle at the disposal of Matthias Lang von Wellenberg. This figure was symbolic. The future bishop of the city of Gurk and influential cardinal of Cartagena had not only ecclesiastical authority, but also an extraordinary understanding of fortification matters. Under his patronage, large-scale restoration work was carried out in the castle. Hochosterwitz was not just renovated, it was rethought and strengthened, preparing for new challenges of history that were soon to change its fate forever. The age of the Kevenghüllers, the birth of the Fortress-Labyrinth. In 1541, Emperor Ferdinand I made a strategic decision that forever changed the fate of Hochosterwitz. He gave the castle to his governor in Carinthia, Christoph Kevenghüller von Eichelberg. This warrior, who gained fame during the bloody wars with the Ottoman Empire, became the first in a long line of owners from the Kevenghüller family. The history of this family is impressive. Their descendants treat their heritage with such incredible awe that they take care of the castle to this day, preserving it as a living memory of their ancestors. Christoph Kevenghüller did not waste time on trifles. He began a large-scale reconstruction, striving to make the fortress invulnerable to modern weapons. To realize his plans, he invited Domenico Dell'Alio, one of the most outstanding military architects of that era, whose vision transformed the old castle into a first-class example of fortification art. Georg Kevenghüller, genius of the defensive art. After Christoph's death, the inheritance passed to his son Johann. However, Johann, being a diplomat at the Spanish court, spent most of his life far from his homeland. The castle was transferred to the supervision of his cousin, Georg Kevenghüller. This man turned out to be a real visionary. In 1571, Georg finally bought the rights to Hochosterwitz from Archduke Charles II, becoming the full owner, and it was from that moment that the castle began to acquire its unique appearance, which amazes the world even today. Georg did not just rebuild the walls, he invested his own money in creating a system that still causes admiration among professional fortifiers. His main ingenious solution was the famous 14 gates. It was not just a road to the castle gates, but a well-thought-out engineering trap. Each layer of defense had its own unique defense mechanism, forcing the enemy to go through real hell before he could approach the main gate. During the same period, the castle's living quarters were significantly expanded and added to, transforming the austere fortress into a livable residence. The defensive walls were supplemented with bastions and loopholes capable of withstanding intense shelling. Georg Kevenghüller proved that defense can be not only effective, but also incredibly sophisticated, creating an architectural masterpiece that even after 400 years seems impregnable. The 14-gate system, a trap for uninvited guests. When Georg Kevenghüller designed the climb to Hochosterwitz, he wasn't just building a road, he was creating a consistent filter for the enemy army. The path to the castle is a narrow, winding serpentine road that winds up the cliff, and there are 14 gates on it. Each gate is a separate fortification unit, an autonomous combat point, which was designed to delay the enemy, disorient him, and subject him to devastating fire from all sides. Constant control. How did this system work? The narrowness of the path did not allow the enemy to deploy a battle formation. The army turned into a thin line stretching along the cliff. They had no room to maneuver, and most importantly, their flanks were completely open to fire from the high walls of the castle which overhung the road. Each of the 14 gates was fortified with powerful wooden and iron doors. But this was only the beginning. Behind each gate, surprises awaited the so-called killing fields. Behind some gates, narrow courtyard straps were provided, where the enemy entered in the hope that the path was free and immediately found himself locked. Stones, hot tar, and a hail of arrows flew at them from above. At key points, the path could be interrupted by drawbridges and moats, and the enemy standing in a narrow passage became an ideal target. As soon as the enemy broke through one gate, he was not in the castle. He found himself in front of the next ones, which were even more fortified than the previous ones. Each subsequent tier was higher, which gave the defenders a huge advantage in height. The soldiers defending the castle could retreat upwards, passing fire to their comrades in the following positions. Georg Kevenghüller calculated everything so that not a single meter of the road remained a dead zone. The walls of the bastions were designed at such an angle that archers and crossbowmen could fire at the enemy even when he was already close to the gate. In addition to its purely military effectiveness, this system had a devastating psychological effect. When the enemy overcame the first, second, and third gates, losing hundreds of men, he saw 11 more obstacles ahead. This was exhausting not only physically but also morally. An army that passed through this corridor of death, reaching the last gate, usually lost all fighting spirit. Today, these gates, which were once a symbol of inevitable death, have become a major tourist route. But even now, climbing this road, you feel the same engineering logic that turned the rock into an impregnable bastion capable of stopping anyone. Myths and legends of the Corridor of Death, the legend of the Shadow Hunter. Local legends say that the Hochosterwitz gate system had its own protector who was called the Shadow Hunter. It was believed that during a siege, not only a soldier hid in each gate, but also a master spy who knew every crack in the walls. The myth says that these people could move inside the walls through hidden passages. When the enemy broke through another gate and found himself trapped, the hunter extinguished all the torches, and the invaders found themselves in complete darkness. The panic in the enemy ranks was so strong that they began to fight each other, mistaking their own for enemies. The myth of the Iron Maiden of the 13th Gate. There is a dark myth that the 13th Gate was special. In front of it, a figure resembling a knight in armor supposedly stood. They say that it was a mechanical guard, an invention of craftsmen who worked for the Kevenghüllers. If an enemy approached them without a special password, a lever would be activated, and the knight would release a hidden iron chain that blocked the way, and hot sand would begin to pour from the holes above his head. Although it sounds like a fairy tale, historians confirm that the architecture of the gate does indeed have strange niches for complex mechanisms, the purpose of which is still not solved. Actual confirmation, the trap of inevitability. Historians confirm that Georg Kevenghüller was so obsessed with security that he personally checked every gate. He conducted so-called training sieges where his own soldiers tried to break through the gates dressed in enemy armor. If someone managed to get through too quickly, Georg ordered the entrance to be redone, narrowing it even more. This made the castle not only an engineering project, but also the fruit of constant endurance testing. The legend of the last chance. The myth says that the 14th gate closest to the castle was never closed to its own. They say that they had a magic lock that recognized the steps of the faithful servants of the Kevenghüller family. When the enemy approached the gate, they became heavier than a mountain, and when the master approached, they opened without touching. This is, of course, just a fairy tale, but for that time it was an incredible example of how effectively the lifting mechanisms controlled from the tower worked. The legend of the Black Princess. Although we mentioned Countess Margaret of Maltaz as an enemy of the castle, local folklore has made her the main ghost of these rocks. According to legend, she was so enraged by her defeat at the walls of Hochosterwitz that she made a pact with the dark forces to find a way to take revenge. It is said that on moonless nights, the ghost of Margaret appears at the 14th gate, trying to open it with her cold touch. Those who have seen her claim that she still holds the keys to the castle, which have long since disappeared from the real world. About the Kevenghüller personal army. In the 16th century, Georg Kevenghüller created something unusual. He had his own army of armed peasants who lived in the villages below the castle, but had their own sets of armor at each of the 14 gates. The myth says that in the event of an attack, they would change clothes so quickly that it seemed to the enemies that the castle was not defended by people, but by spirits materializing from stone. This fueled rumors that the castle was impossible to take because it was guarded by living statues. The myth of the underground passage to the Earth's core. The old inhabitants of Carinthia believe that under the foundation of the castle, there is a tunnel that goes vertically down into the bowels of the mountain. Legend has it that this tunnel was not created by people, but by ancient mountain spirits who are loyal to the Kevenghüller family. Allegedly, through this passage, the castle receives energy from the Earth's core, which allows it to stand so steadfast for centuries, despite wars and earthquakes. This is excellent material for reflection on why the castle has never been completely destroyed. The legend of the silent bell. The castle has an old bell tower where a bell hangs, which, as they say, has not rung since the last Turkish invasion. According to legend, it fell silent because it heard the last breath of one of the defenders and promised not to ring until blood was shed in the castle again. To this day, the bell remains silent. Locals believe that if it ever rings on its own, it will be a sign of great changes for all of Austria. Factual detail: a hiding place in the wall. During a 19th century restoration, a niche was found in one of the thick walls of the 8th gate, in which lay a set of 16th century surgical instruments. Myth immediately attributed them to an alchemist doctor who supposedly treated soldiers using magic potions. This find gave life to the legends of Georg Kevenghüller's secret laboratory, although the reality is more prosaic. Most likely, the instruments belonged to a military paramedic. The legend of the Kevenghüller treasure. Rumor has it that before one of the particularly dangerous sieges, Georg Kevenghüller hid the family treasury not in the cellars, but in a specially prepared so-called false bastion which he planned to blow up if the enemy broke through. Legend has it that this treasure still lies in a cavity in one of the rocks under the castle, and is protected not only by the stone but also by a spell of silence. And anyone who searches for gold for selfish purposes loses the ability to hear the sounds of the world until he leaves the borders of Carinthia. About the window to the future. There is a small window in the main tower called the window to the future. According to old legends, whoever looks into it at exactly noon on the summer solstice will see not the mountains, but their own reflection, but not as it is now, but in many years. Locals believe that this window was designed so that the owners of the castle could assess whether they were worthy of their inheritance in the eyes of descendants. A stone that has overcome time. Hochosterwitz Castle is not just a fortification carved into the dolomites. It is a story frozen in time about how human ingenuity inevitably triumphs. Each of the 14 gates, each ledge of the rock, and each stone laid back in the days of Carinthian whisper to us that true security is not only the thickness of the walls, but also the clarity of the mind. When you stand on the top, looking at the endless expanses of Carinthia, there is a strange feeling that the castle does not just stand on a mountain, it seems to control the rhythm of this land. It saw the arrival of Slavic princes, repelled Turkish invasions, and survived the heyday of great empires. While kingdoms fell apart and the names of states changed, Hochosterwitz remained unchanged, continuing to serve its masters. This place teaches us that even the most difficult path, the path through 14 gates of mortal danger, can be passed if you have a clear plan and cold calculation. Today, when the world around us is becoming as fragile as the walls of medieval fortresses, Hochosterwitz reminds us that the real masterpiece is not the one that conquered the world by force, but the one that managed to maintain its integrity, standing in the face of history. Perhaps that is why the Kevenghüller family still holds this castle in their hands. After all, in our fleeting world, where everything depreciates in a matter of years, there are things that cannot be bought or destroyed, a memory carved in stone and loyalty to a place that has become a true home for several generations, higher than the sky. Born from the ashes of a revolution. In the heart of the Belgian province of Namur, in the middle of the dense forest of the Cell, a phantom stood for decades. Its spires, like the fingers of a skeleton, pierced the sky, and its eye-socket windows looked at the world with mute reproach. This was the Miranda Castle, or as it was later called, the Noisy Castle. The history of this place began not with construction but with flight. During the horrors of the French Revolution, the family of Count Lydekker Beaufort was forced to abandon their family castle of Vevey. Fleeing the guillotine, they found refuge on a modest farm. It was this farm, once a place of survival, that would later become the basis for a grand project. The descendants of the Count decided that here, where their ancestors hid from death, a palace should be built, which would personify their victory over time and persecution. Edward Milner and the Game with Time. In 1866, the English architect Edward Milner arrived on the territory. He was a master who saw the world through the prism of English Gothic and Romanticism. He conceived not just a summer residence, but a real stone ode to the Gothic style. However, fate decided otherwise. Milner did not live to see the completion of his creation. He died in 1884, leaving the castle half-finished. Construction stretched for decades, and only in 1907, thanks to the efforts of the French architect Pelchner, the castle finally found its finished form, the same central tower that became its calling card. It was a triumph of brick and stone, the sculptural forms of which were carefully faced to imitate natural rocks. The Liddecock-Beaufort family obtained their dream residence, unaware that the silence of the Nama forests was only a temporary respite from the trials of the 20th century. War and the children of the railway. The castle was not spared by the Second World War. It became an occupied territory, a witness to the Ardennes operation and the movement of Nazi troops. Surprisingly, it emerged from this conflict relatively intact, as if Milner's architecture itself protected it from madness. In 1950, a new era began. Miranda Castle became the noisy castle. The National Railway Company of Belgium decided that this giant should serve other purposes: the rehabilitation of children. For decades, children's laughter rang here, sports camps worked, children who needed help were treated. This was the golden era of the castle, when it was filled with life, not ghosts. But by the end of the 1970s, the company's interest began to fade. The costs of maintaining the colossal structure became prohibitive. In 1991, the castle doors closed forever. The era of destruction and urban myth. After 1991, dark times began for Miranda. Fires, either accidental or deliberate, burned out the insides of the castle. The ceiling began to collapse and the facade began to crumble. But it was in this state that the castle became iconic. Photographers, urbex researchers of abandoned places, and just adventurers from all over the world flocked here. The castle became the most recognizable abandoned object in Europe. Its gloomy corridors, vine-covered stairs, and a clock tower that had stopped forever, all this created the atmosphere of horror films. But behind the romanticism of neglect was the reality. The owners of the castle, the Liddecock-Beaufort family, did not have the funds for restoration. Millions of euros were needed to restore the building, which had become a disaster trap. Mystical labyrinth legends of Miranda. It was here that the castle began to be overgrown with myths that turned it into the king of abandoned places. Ghosts of the railway children. Since the castle was a children's camp and sanatorium for a long time, many stories have arisen about children who did not leave the castle. Stalkers who spent the night in the castle often said that at night, from the empty corridors, they could hear the sounds of children's laughter, the rattling of toys, or crying. Especially often they mentioned a boy in a blue uniform who supposedly stood near the windows of the main tower. The myth says that these are the spirits of children who died here during epidemics in the 50s, and the castle took their souls so that they would remain within its walls forever. The clock that stopped time. The central tower of the castle was famous for its clock. Legend has it that when the castle was abandoned in 1991, the clock stopped at exactly midnight. Urbex researchers have often claimed that time flows differently in the castle. An hour inside feels like 10 minutes and sometimes like a whole day. The myth is that if you hear the clock strike in an abandoned castle, you will find yourself in a time trap and will not be able to find a way out until the sun rises. Miranda's Firebird. During the 1991 fire, locals claim to have seen a huge, fiery bird-like figure above the central tower. They called it Miranda's Firebird. According to legend, it was the castle's guardian spirit, leaving the building because it could no longer protect its inhabitants. It is said that after the bird disappeared into the sky, the castle began to die before our eyes. The The walls crumbled faster than any other building in the same condition. The Book of Last Names. There is a legend that the last inhabitants of the castle, members of the Lydekker-Beaufort family before leaving it forever, left the Book of Last Names in the library. It supposedly recorded the names of all the people who had once worked in the castle or visited it. The myth says that the book did not burn down during the fire, but was hidden in the walls, and whoever finds it will be able to see how the fate of the family changed through the prism of the fates of their servants. This is a very strong social myth about the connection between the aristocracy and the common people. The key to the 14th room. Among those who illegally entered the castle, the so-called stalkers, there was a myth about the 14th room. Supposedly, there were exactly 13 rooms in the castle that were open to inspection, but there was also a 14th room, the entrance to which was disguised as a mirror. It is said that whoever finds the 14th room will be able to make a wish, but the price for this will be that he will never be able to return home. This is very reminiscent of classic Gothic plots, and many have spent hours knocking on the walls in search of this mirror. The Alchemist from the Tower. Locals of Celle said that the last representative of the Lydekker-Beaufort family was fond of the occult sciences. Allegedly, a secret library with ancient manuscripts was arranged in the central tower, completed in 1907. Myth says that during the fire of 1991, everything burned down except for one tome, which was found charred, but with strange symbols that glowed in the dark. It was believed that the castle deliberately attracted the fire to destroy evidence of alchemical experiments. Mirror Corridor. Urbex researchers often mention the so-called Mirror Corridor. It should not be confused with the 14th room. The myth says that in one of the galleries where there were many mirrors, the reflections of people behaved differently. They could be a second late or even look in the other direction. This was used as an explanation for why many photographers complained about strange silhouettes in their pictures, which could not be explained by the play of light. The Ghost Castle. Miranda Castle became so famous online that it became a phenomenon of mass illusion. Many people who had never even been to Belgium claimed to have seen the castle in their dreams. Stories began to emerge of a traveling castle, supposedly appearing in various forests in Europe, but only those in difficult circumstances could see it. This gave Miranda an aura of something supernatural existing outside of physical reality. Abandoned letters. In the 1990s, when the castle was still accessible, researchers found scattered letters dating back to the 1950s and 60s, the time of the children's camp. The myth turned these letters into messages from the other world. It is said that if you read such a letter aloud in the hall of the castle, you can hear the answer to your question. This is a very touching myth that emphasizes the tragedy of the children's camp that has become a wasteland. Stone Tiers. Legend has it that the stone used to face the castle was brought from the site of a great battle. This is said to be why the castle walls cry. The condensation that drips down the walls in damp weather was often mistaken for tears. Locals believed that it was not just moisture, but the tears of soldiers who could not find peace. This gave the building an even more Gothic and lively character. The final finale and demolition. 2013 was the point of no return. The owners officially requested permission to demolish, citing the danger to people's lives. A war began between common sense and love of history. Public organizations, petitions, protests, everything was in vain. The decision was made. In October 2016, the excavators began their dirty work. It was a long, painful process that resembled a slow execution. Appeals stopped the work from time to time, giving fans hope, but it was only a reprieve. In October 2017, only rubble remained of the majestic Miranda castle. The stables are the only thing that survived, as a mute memory of the former luxury. Miranda's lesson. Miranda Castle didn't just disappear, it left behind a question. Why do we love abandoned buildings so much but are unwilling to pay to preserve them while they are still alive? Miranda has become a symbol of the fact that architectural heritage is not a constant. It's fragile like paper. The castle's history is a lesson that when a building loses its purpose, it becomes doomed. Today, looking at photos of what's left of the stables, you feel empty. But the memory of this castle lives on in thousands of shots taken by urban explorers. It was a count's dream, a children's camp, and the king of abandoned castles. Miranda is gone, but it taught us to appreciate time while it's still on our side. Geology as a verdict, a fiery foundation. Our immersion in the history of Stirling begins not with stone but with fire. 350 million years ago, when the continents were still looking for their places on the map, a volcano erupted here. The lava solidified, forming a colossal volcanic plug, a solid basalt monolith, which turned out to be stronger than the land itself around it. For millions of years, glaciers flowed around this obstacle, cutting off the edges and forming vertical cliffs. Thus Castle Hill was born. When the first Stone Age people set foot on these lands, they saw not just a mountain, but an ideal bastion. On three sides, an abyss that makes your head spin. On the fourth, a steep climb that turns any assault into suicide. The name Stirling comes from the Celtic stir, meaning mountain, and lyn, meaning river. It is the point where rock meets water and the lowlands meet the highlands. Whoever owned this hill held the narrow throat of the whole country in their hands. Stirling was and remains the key to Scotland. Shadows of Rome and the First Kings. As the Roman legions advanced north, their engineers immediately appreciated the strategic potential of this height. They built the fortress of Irdu here. We can only guess what this ancient logistics looked like, how thousands of tons of materials were lifted to such a height without modern cranes. It was a triumph of discipline over the landscape. After the Romans, the fortress fell into disrepair, but the strategic point could not remain empty for long. In 1110, King Alexander I built the first full-fledged castle here. It was Stirling that he chose as his residence, and it was here within these walls that he ended his earthly journey. Since then, the castle has become not just a fort, but a sacred place of the Scottish monarchy. Warwolf, the engineered terror of 1304. We often think of medieval sieges as chaotic, but the siege of Stirling in 1304 was both a triumph and a horror of military engineering. King Edward I of England, known as the Hammer of the Scots, held the castle under siege for 3 long months. The Scots inside were doomed, but they held out. Edward ordered the construction of the Warwolf, the largest trebuchet in world history. 50 carpenters worked on it day and night. It was a megastructure for its time. When the castle's defenders saw this wooden monster, they hoisted the white flag. But Edward, he was a fanatic about his design. He refused to surrender and ordered the Scots back into the castle. He wanted to see his machine tear down the walls. A 300-pound rock flew through the air, shattering not only the walls but also Stirling's belief in impregnability. It was a war of attrition in materials and souls. Wallace and the Bruce, battles that changed everything. Stirling has seen more blood than any other fortress in Britain. The Battle of Stirling Bridge in 1297 became a legend thanks to William Wallace. It was not just a skirmish, it was a tactical masterpiece. Wallace exploited the geography of the River Forth, luring the English onto a narrow wooden bridge. When half the enemy army had crossed, the bridge became a bottleneck. The Scots struck. The River Forth was red with blood, and from the castle towers watched those who understood that Stirling was becoming free again. In 1314, during the legendary Battle of Bannockburn, the fate of the castle hung in the balance again. Robert the Bruce knew that without Stirling, independence was impossible. The castle was besieged at least 8 times. Its walls remember the blows of battering rams, the whistle of arrows, and the roar of the first cannons. A mask for a monster, the golden age of the Stuarts. As we move into the 16th century, the Jacobean era, Stirling ceases to be just a rough pile of stones. It becomes an illusion. The Scottish crown was trying to prove to the world that they were not just wild Highlanders on the edge of the earth, but full-fledged players in big politics. Here a strange, almost schizophrenic contrast arises. Outside, it is austere fortress walls, ready to be bombarded by heavy artillery. But inside, a new royal palace. It is like finding a piece of jewelry inside a rusty battle helmet. Stirling's head's wooden Panopticon. Lift your eyes up to the ceiling of the Great Hall. Once upon a time, Stirling's heads looked down on you from their 56 oak medallions. This is not just a decoration. This is a wooden Panopticon. Kings, heroes, and mythical creatures. All of them were carved with such detail that it seemed as if these eyes were watching your every step. Below, wine, laughter, and secret conspiracies. Above, 56 silent witnesses who record your every gesture in the memory of the oak. It was a medieval social rating. You were always under the supervision of monsters and ancestors. French chic on Scottish blood. James V brought architectural chic from France but planted it on Scottish granite. He combined the lightness of French lines with the heavy German sobriety. This created a unique architectural oxymoron. You see the delicate carvings on the stone and the ancient guards, but they are located at arm's length from the brutal loopholes. Elegance in the ring of the environment. The Scottish kings wanted to live in the Renaissance, but they knew that this Renaissance could be stitched with an English core at any moment. Fragile beauty, clamped in the iron grip of the rock. Holyrood, a shrine that survived the ashes. Not far from the castle stands the Church of the Holy Cross, Holyrood. It has stood here since 1129. This is the only church in Scotland, apart from Westminster, where services are still held and where the walls remember the touch of royal crowns. In 1543, 9-month-old Mary Stuart was crowned here. When a great fire in the 15th century wiped the city off the face of the earth, turning Stirling into black ash, the church stood firm. The stone proved stronger than the fire. People whispered that it was not the beams that held it up, but the spirits of the Stuart dynasty. For them, it was not just a building, but an anchor that held the nation above the abyss. Stirling's shadows, a sponge for memory. Stirling is such as a sponge. Over the centuries, it has absorbed the memories of thousands of lives, their fears, ambitions, and last breaths. There is no real silence here. The Green Lady, the shadow of the maid who saved the queen from the flames by sacrificing herself. She appears in the dark passages before another disaster comes to the castle. The Pink Lady, an elegant figure in a silk dress, leaving behind the scent of flowers in the middle of a fierce Scottish winter. She walks through closed doors, ignoring the laws of physics. They are not just ghosts. They are constant reminders that the castle does not belong to tourists, but to history. Alchemist and flight into the abyss, John Damien. At the beginning of the 16th century, during the reign of James IV, a mysterious Italian named John Damien appeared in the castle. He called himself an alchemist and promised the king to find the philosopher's stone to turn lead into gold for the Scottish treasury. But the real madness happened in 1507. Damien announced that with the help of occult knowledge, he would be able to fly from Stirling to France. He built huge wings from bird feathers and jumped from the highest wall of the castle. Of course, he fell down with a stone, breaking his hip. Damien himself explained the failure as a technical error. They say the wings had chicken feathers, and chickens are terrestrial creatures, so they pulled him to the ground. Locals whispered that Damien was trying to escape from demons he himself had summoned in Stirling's labs. They say that on windy nights at the foot of the cliff, you can hear the sound of wings flapping, never to lift their owner into the sky. Knot and the shadows of Camelot. At the foot of Castle Hill is a strange geometric structure made of earth and grass, King's Knot. From above, it looks like a perfect maze or an ancient scheme. Archaeologists say that these are the remains of 17th century gardens, but mystics are sure that this was the real site of King Arthur's Round Table. At dusk, when the mist from the River Forth envelops these geometric patterns, it seems that the earth beneath them breathes. There is a belief that the knot is a portal. If you walk along a certain route on the night of Samhain, you can hear the clanking of knights' armor waiting for their return. This is the perfect visual for your video, perfect geometry in the midst of wild nature, which looks like a frozen program code of the ancient world. Beheading Stone, the Curse of Moat Hill. North of the castle is Moat Hill, where lies a gloomy artifact, the so-called Beheading Stone. It is closed with an iron grate like a wild beast. For centuries, traitors and enemies of the crown have been beheaded here. Myth says that the stone was so soaked with the blood of aristocrats that it acquired a will of its own. Stalkers say that if you touch it on a cold night, you can feel not icy metal, but the warmth of living flesh. They say that the souls of the executed still wander the hill, trying to find their lost bodies in the castle's casemates. This is a true noir, a story about justice that has turned into an eternal curse. The Highlander Ghost, the sentinel who never retired. This myth is relatively modern but no less eerie. In the 1960s, when the castle was still home to the military, sentries repeatedly reported seeing a strange officer in a traditional kilt and full 19th century ceremonial armor. He would appear out of nowhere, walk past the post, and disappear into a blank wall. The most interesting thing is that he didn't look like a transparent ghost. The soldiers mistook him for a real person, until he dissolved into thin air right before their eyes. They say that this was one of the castle's defenders, who was so afraid of missing an enemy attack that even death was not a reason for him to leave his post. The Curse of the Stirling Heads. The same oak medallions on the ceiling of the palace Stirling heads. Each of them has a unique facial expression. There is a legend that the master carvers were Freemasons and invested a certain emotion or sin in each face. They say that if you look at a certain head for a long time, it begins to change its expression, namely either smiling or winking. In 1777, the ceiling collapsed, and according to local legend, the medallions scattered throughout the neighborhood. People who took them home as souvenirs began to complain of nightmares and misfortunes. The castle seemed to demand its artifacts back. Only after they were returned and restored did relative peace again reign in the halls of the royal palace. But their gaze still remains heavy, as if they know something about each visitor that they themselves are trying to hide. From crown to bayonet, regression and revival. In 1685, the castle changed professions. Luxury gave way to pragmatism. Stirling became a military fortress. During the Napoleonic Wars, the halls that once received ambassadors were turned into barracks. It was a strange, almost blasphemous adaptation. Where kings once listened to the lute, soldiers of the Highlanders cleaned their rifles and sharpened bayonets. In 1855, fire came to its rescue again. A terrible fire almost put an end to the history of the fortress. Robert Billing's restoration was an attempt to roll back the system, to return the castle to its original appearance. It lasted a century. Only in 1964 did the military finally leave these walls, consigning them to eternity. The stone that has overcome time. Today, Stirling is not a museum. It is a living engineering organism that breathes with this land. If you climb the hill of Abbey Craig to the 67-meter Wallace Tower, you can see the true scale of this game. The castle stands on volcanic rock, unbreakable, gloomy, eternal. It has seen the legions of Rome, heard the roar of the first guns, and seen Nazi planes in its sky. Borders have changed, states have disappeared, but Stirling has remained in place. This is a stone that has overcome time not by strength, but by endurance. Every crack in its walls is a line in a book that Scotland has been writing for 1,000 years. And we have just turned one page. Thanks for watching, my friend. Don't forget to watch our other videos and learn new mysteries. We have a lot more interesting things in store for you. Do you think a stone can really remember what it saw? Or is it just our imagination trying to fill the void of the old corridors? Write in the comments. Leave your questions and wishes in the comments. What should we tell you about next time?